Hi, at the time you're seeing this, I'll probably be on vacation, so I'm not going to be live on Twitch during this week, but I'm still going to record a couple of nice little YouTube videos for you guys to enjoy during the time I'm gone. Today, I want to talk and ramble a little bit about a couple of problem cards or problematic topics in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that people seem to never really agree on, and give you guys my take on that, and especially also touch a little bit on how we discuss certain topics and maybe how to do that a little bit better in the future. And I hope you enjoy it. It's mostly obviously going to touch on stuff like, floodgates, blowout cards, turn one combo, unbreakable boards. A lot of things that are really hot topics, I think, for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of people criticize these types of things, and I wanted to maybe encapsulate my opinion on a lot of these things into one short video. I'm hopefully going to be able to structure my thoughts well. I hope you enjoy. Please make sure to discuss in the comments down below, and if you like that type of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and let's get started. I want to start by saying that I think my impression is that most people criticize the aspect of cards being not very fun or not very fair. I think that is what I hear most of the time. And of course, what is fun and what is fair is highly subjective when it comes to a card game like Yu-Gi-Oh! So I can only really give you guys my opinion here on how I personally define these terms for me, but I think it's also something that actually, despite everyone always arguing, I think a lot of people in the community agree about what is fundamentally fun and what is not. And that is, for me personally, is whenever there's as much interaction as possible and when both players have a feeling where they take part in the game. I think at a very, very basic level, that's something that can be said. I don't like playing a game where I feel like I had no agency whatsoever over the game. I didn't really take part because of certain cards or certain interactions. Let it be a floodgate, let it be a broken turn one board that I couldn't beat because I didn't draw an out to it, whatever. It doesn't really matter how it happened, but whenever I felt like from start to finish, there was never a point in which I had any chance or any say in the game. That feels bad. I feel like most people think that's like a waste of time then, because like, why am I playing the game when from start to finish there was never a point where I could have even participated, That being said, I feel like a lot of people mistake the terms that we're using when we're discussing these cards, because when something is unfun or unfair, a lot of people always take that as the card is unjustified. And I just want to quickly say that I don't think that's the case. I've recently been talking about that a decent amount on stream, especially when I reacted to some of the MBT Magical Hats discussion videos, which I highly recommend if you enjoy these types of Yu-Gi-Oh discussions to also give those a watch. I always have a ton of fun reacting to these on stream. By the way, you can also see my reactions now. There's now a react channel for my stuff on stream that doesn't really make it into an edited YouTube video, but we still don't want the footage to be lost because it's like an interesting opinion or interesting reaction to certain Yu-Gi-Oh topics. The channel is called Joshua Schmidt Plus. I'm also going to link that in the description down below just for your information if you like usually don't manage to watch any of the streams because they're outside of your time zones or something like that. I think that's going to be something you enjoy. All right, where was I? Unfun versus unfair and unjustified. Yes, I personally believe that a card can be unfair or unfun to play against, but still be justified. And I think that really narrows down the problem, because whether we're talking about floodgates or we're talking about, broken turn one combos, or we're talking about broken going second blowout cards like evenly matched, dark ruler, forbidden droplet, all that stuff can feel very, very unfair and unfun to face when you're like playing a deck that's good and you're like make a board and then it gets torn apart because they had that one board breaker you couldn't like play around. Not a very fun experience. However, I would still argue that these cards in current Yu-Gi-Oh, they are justified. Actually, hear me out. The same goes for floodgates as well. Floodgates are really unfun and I wish they didn't exist, but they are to some extent necessary. And hold on, before the floodgate haters get at me, you guys know I don't like floodgates, but I think that the current way we play Yu-Gi-Oh is very, very focused on doing as much as possible in one turn. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but most of the games that I currently play in Yu-Gi-Oh, like for example the most recent 250th YCS, most of my games are decided by turn 3, a large portion even by turn 1 or 2, right? Because it's a lot about making a turn 1 board, your opponent can't play through it, and you win on the turn after or the turn after that if you don't have a battle phase because you're playing Runics or something. But like, you're trying to establish control over the game on turn 1, and it either leaves your hands and your opponent wins, or it never leaves your hands and you win. Like I said earlier, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think even games that are condensed in few turns can still have a lot of good decision making. I think that is not necessarily a KO criteria for a format being bad or the game being bad. Absolutely not the case. But it does have some implications where certain cards need to be more impactful, basically, when decks are designed in a way where they do as much as possible in one turn, right? You're not getting anywhere with normal trap cards really anymore, right? The stuff that you set on turn one, if you're playing a trap deck, needs to be highly impactful. And this is why I understand the people that when we criticize floodgates as a community, there's always people in the comments that are like, how are you criticizing these cards when they are all that I have to combat like combo strategies or monster heavy strategies at doing whatever they want to me, right? Because when I set a couple normal trap cards, because I'm a control player, I want to play a slow game of Yu-Gi-Oh, those don't cut it anymore. And that's fair, right? That is a fair point. Those cards, if you're trying to play a trap deck, those cards are probably your only realistic way to stay in the game for longer than a turn, right? And in my opinion, by definition, that makes those cards justified, because I think one of the worst things a game can do is force everyone to play the same type of decks, right? If some people just like to be the trap player, the trap deck enjoyers, right? That's totally fine. Let them play their strategy. It might not be the best strategy, which it arguably isn't even with floodgates, but I think it is fine for everyone to be able to at least play and participate with the decks that they like. And so floodgates, as of right now, are definitely justified. They're not fun, but they're justified. The same goes for board breakers. Board breakers, in my opinion, like the evenly matched kind and whatnot, are not very fun. I mean, if you're resolving it, yeah, that's cool, but like for the most part, overall, it's always like one player ends up not having a lot of fun when one of those cards resolved. Does that mean they're not justified? No. They're definitely justified because people are vomiting their hands onto the field on turn one, and there needs to be counterplay for that because you don't want the player going first to always win. I think this is a fundamental game design problem that the game designers, instead of fixing it by not making archetypes and decks that always play as much as possible on turn one, they have given us band-aid fixes over time, right? This is an issue that is not new to Yu-Gi-Oh! This is something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten faster and faster and faster over the years. Once again, let me repeat, not necessarily a bad thing, but that's been a thing, right? Even like over 10 years ago, the game has been getting faster, right? There we saw decks like Dragon Rulers, Mermails, whatnot, faster decks in general, doing more and more and more in the early turns of the game. And as a response to that, they've never actually decided to slow down with that. They've rather just given us more cards to combat that, right? In the beginning, they started by making hand traps. Hand traps was their first response to going first being too powerful, right? Going first turn of the game, way too important, decides games way more often than it did back in the day. Hand traps were their first thing. Okay, like we're giving you guys a couple tools to respond to your opponent when you go second. And then the second thing they did was actually reduce the starting player's hand to 5 cards, which, if you don't know, that was not a thing. Back in the day, we would draw a 6th card when we went first, which they changed in 2014 actually. A few things were done trying to make going first less relevant. None of that ever worked. Going first has always been the most powerful thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! With very, very few exceptions. Now, this kind of kicks off this cycle of game design problems that, yeah, they cause each other. Like, they gave us hand traps to counter going first, and then people were still going first, but they would sometimes lose to hand traps. And so when they made new archetypes and they wanted us to buy and play with the new cards, they had to give us archetypes that didn't lose to hand traps, because why would I play an archetype that loses to hand traps when there's already archetypes out there that do like the same thing, right? They needed to be better at doing that. And so they did. They gave us decks that beat hand traps, right? And they keep doing that to this day, right? They give us new hand traps and then new decks to play around those hand traps, right? They gave us Nibiru, and that was like this huge turning point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where like decks were divided between decks that can beat Nibiru and decks that can't beat Nibiru. And it still is like that to this day. But nowadays, in popular meta strategies, you will always have some way to beat Nibiru, because if your deck doesn't beat Nibiru, you can't play it, right? Simple as that. And in order to sell new archetypes, we need archetypes that have ways to deal with Nibiru. I mean, look at Sprite. Sprite has gigantic Sprite. Card literally reads stop Nibiru this turn. We have Kashtira, which has a way to summon its boss monsters with only 4 summons. A lot of other decks have Baron de Fleur, Appaloosa to their disposal to play around Nibiru. The same goes for board breakers, because at some point they've just made decks too powerful to be even stopped by hand traps, right? I mean, we still see hand traps every once in a while in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, right? You still see a couple of them, but for the most part, drawing one hand trap in 2023 Yu-Gi-Oh is not the same as drawing one hand trap a couple years ago, right? Because these days, if I draw a full engine hand with one hand trap, I lose the game most of the time going second. Back in the day, you drew one hand trap, you'd be fine, right? Most of the time it was like, yeah, okay, I'm fine. I can prevent the most important thing they're trying to do, and I'm probably okay to play the game. Not the thing anymore. And that's because they've just designed more powerful archetypes that, of course, beat one hand trap because no one would play them otherwise. And the same can be applied to board breakers, where at some point they were like, yeah, we can't keep making more hand traps for going second. So what about like we give them cards that are generically good going second, which in general also not a bad idea. But once again, that's just a band-aid fix, right? That is just a band-aid fix to going first being way too powerful in Yu-Gi-Oh! And also the game being way too centered about one turn. Because honestly, a hand trap stopping your turn would not be that big of a problem if the game actually had more than 2 turns after that. You all see how this one core issue of the game being so focused on that first turn creates all these other issues, and how them not actually fixing that issue but rather just giving us more and more band-aids for it is like what's causing all these things, right? As an example, they've given us kaijus at some point, they've given us evenly matched, they've given us sphere mode, they've given us lightning storm, they've unbanned dark hole, raigeki, they've given us forbidden droplet, all those cards together. And I think this is not something you can do forever, because I think we're reaching a point where there is just too many cards for going second that it's going to be impossible to design decks that even feel like real Yu-Gi-Oh decks, when you have to keep in mind that they need to beat all of those cards, right? If your deck summons 1 boss monster, you're going to lose to a kaiju. If your deck summons 2 boss monsters, you're going to lose to Lava Golem. If your deck summons 3 cool monsters, you're losing to Sphere Mode. If your deck summons more, you're losing to Kurikara. If your deck revolves around back row, you're losing to Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, evenly matched. Decks are able to play around one or multiples of these cards, but there's no deck in Yu-Gi-Oh that really plays around all of them, because the only way to play around all of these cards would be to keep resources for future turns. But there are no future turns. It doesn't. It's not a thing. It doesn't work. Like, this is how we would typically do it, right? Is like have cards left, have follow-up. But the problem is with modern Yu-Gi-Oh is like a lot of the time you can't really rely on that, because like you might not be able to break your opponent's board back, or you might just lose. And I think we are at an important, like, critical point where Yu-Gi-Oh is still fun. Yu-Gi-Oh is still a good game right now. Once again, I'm putting a lot of points out here that might seem like I don't like what's going on, but I still really enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh, and I think we are in a still a healthy spot for the game. But I am a little bit concerned about where this is going, right? Because you see what I'm saying is like, how do you design decks at this point that actually beat all the different board breakers that are out there and all the hand traps that are out there? You might argue that should probably not be the case anyways. There should not be a deck that does all that. But with their previous approach of like not actually solving the problems that the game has and actually just giving us more and more powerful archetypes, you have to ask yourself the question, like, how are they going to do it, right? They're probably going to try and find a way to give us an archetype that sees play regardless of all those board breakers being a thing. And that's what I'm worried about. Like, how is that going to look? To get to a close here, I think there is a big difference between the game being balanced and the game being as fun as possible. Because I think the game is balanced right now. We're in a fine equilibrium where going first and going second is not the biggest indicator right now. It's definitely been worse over the past years in other formats. Like, currently going second is fine. You have tools at your disposal. You're not auto losing. And the fact that people are forced to respect cards like Nibiru and then make a less powerful board because of it in like the most powerful deck, which is Kashtira, it speaks a lot about like that the game is in a balanced state. The fact that we have answers for a lot of the problems in the format is a good thing. Instead of whether the game is balanced, you ask me whether the game is as fun as possible. I think the answer to that is no. I think there's ways to make the game more fun and more interactive in more ways, because I think if we took a little bit of weight off of the first turn and going first, I think that would solve a lot of the problems on its own. You wouldn't be forced to overcommit into board breakers, and if decks are designed to do a little bit less in a single turn, people would also not be relying on floodgates, right? We could ban floodgates without people actually losing their minds, because if decks do a little bit less in a single turn, then you are fine setting normal trap cards, right? And if decks are setting normal trap cards instead of floodgates, we also don't need cards like Evenly or Lightning Storm to auto win against back row decks, because they are now more fair by default. If we get rid of some of the core problems, we can also get rid of some of the band-aid fixes, which sometimes feel unfun to play against as well. I hope I got that across without being too unstructured. I hope you enjoyed this type of thing. If you did, let me know, and I'll make more of these in the future. I do enjoy rambling about the game on stream a lot, and I feel like my chat is always they always appreciate when I do, because they always take part a lot and enjoy it. Once again, if you did too, make sure to let me know in the comments down below and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.